Hi, I'm David Lay. Welcome to the No More Sex Shame video series. This is a series where we are inviting people to talk about ways in which sexual shame has negatively impacted their lives, and even more importantly, how they have found ways to move past that sexual shame, to overcome it, and to live lives of sexual integrity, where they start finding ways to integrate their sexual desires with an authentic, healthy life that where they're in charge. And today we have Samantha with us
Hi.
to talk about her experiences around this. Samantha?
Hi, how are you?
Great. Thank you for doing this.
Sure thing. One of the things I had said before we started recording was that the concept of shame, especially shame around sex, is such a broad topic that I almost don't know where to start in terms of how it's impacted my life, because I feel like at various points over the course of my life, I have experienced shame both around having sex and not having sex or not wanting to have sex. I think about when I was a kid and I was very much a late bloomer. I was in summer camp and all of the kids were making out and talking about their first kiss, and that wasn't something that I had experienced until much, much later. And the shame around not being in the same place sexually as my peers was a major source of shame for me. I joke even that I have since made up for lost time. I now have a full and healthy sex life, or at various points in my life. But that was, I think, my earliest experiences of shame and sex, interestingly, were around not having sex, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Again, as I'm doing these videos, everybody I talk to teaches me something more about sexual
Mm-hmm.
shame, some other aspect of it that I hadn't thought of. And,
Mm-hmm.
you're right. We shame people for not being sexual enough.
Yeah.
Um, and that's hard. It's damned if you do,
Mm-hmm.
damned if you don't.
Yeah, basically. And there had been other times in my life. So I myself am a sex therapist. And there had been moments where I had experienced shame where I was having issues in my own sex life. And here I am teaching other people how to deal with their sex lives. And, that creates a very interesting dichotomy of even experiencing shame when you yourself are a sex positive professional. Like these are some scripts that I still sometimes battle with. But when I think about shame in my own life, I think about it. Well, there's a thing that I tell my clients, especially my clients who have undergone sexual trauma, when they will say, will my life ever be, back to normal or the same that it was? And I think about, it's like breaking a bone or like experiencing a severe injury. Like, it starts out very cute and very painful. And over time, when you do the work and you find people to talk to and you let some of that shame ease, you get to a point where it no longer defines you. You're never the same as you were before you experienced that shame, and those scripts may never go away. Like, I broke my leg some years ago and I'll still get flare-ups, but I can now function with it. And I experience my own sexual shame very much in the same way, where most of the time it doesn't get in my way, but there are these weird times where it will flare up, where someone will ask me point blank what I want, and I'll be like, damn it, I teach people how to do this for a living, right?
Samantha, I'll say, I think that makes you a better therapist.
Yeah.
One of the things that I see with so many therapists is that they are almost blind
Yeah.
to the sexual shame that is in them and that they put on other people.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to therapists that are doing that work for themselves, and they know that they've got shame buttons installed
Yeah.
still in them, that's the kind of therapist I want to refer to, because then I can send somebody to you knowing that they'll be a little safer dealing with
Yeah.
their shame.
But for me, the biggest antidote to shame has been transparency, has been to, finding people who are safe to talk to about some of these issues, and hearing that me too, hearing that, oh yeah, you're not alone, for me has been the most cathartic. And it's also the most cathartic for my clients of, oh, I'm not the only one experiencing this. Oh, I am not the only one who sometimes doesn't have an orgasm, or I'm not the only one who isn't always 100% present during sex, that sort of
That's
thing.
right. I'm not the only one who still has some sexual desires that I'm kind of scared to tell anybody about.
Yeah.
But that I really, really want to make part of my life, and I don't know how to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
I agree with you. That's kind of the point of this video series is actually I want to get these conversations going, because the way we break down shame is by learning that we're not the only one and by talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's the way we get accepted by other people. That's the way we accept other people, and it's the way we accept ourselves.
Yeah. And some of it is cultural. I was recently at home and I was talking to my mom about what I do, and
That's always a fun conversation with moms.
yeah, well, since I'm basically a young Dr. Ruth, it's fine. And I'm interesting to talk about at parties. Now everyone tells my mom about their sex problems. It's kind of hilarious. But my mom was saying that, like, the education that she got about sex was incredibly minimal. And it's only in talking to me and talking about what I do that she realizes some of her own misconceptions and hangups. And, my mom is in her 60s and is discovering some of this as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Good for you and good for your mom.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we've talked about, and just in the last few minutes or so, I know that you do some work with couples around pornography, and
I do.
how do you see shame coming up around those issues, around pornography use within a couple, or with people by themselves?
It really runs the gamut. I have worked with people who come from various religious traditions where they're told that porn is bad and evil and terrible, and it's caused some real damage as a result. I know that the idea of sex and porn addiction is problematic, to say the least. But in some ways, there is a parallel between porn consumption and alcohol consumption, and that the vast majority of people can consume this product healthily and responsibly and in an ethically sourced way. But as soon as we start treating everyone like alcoholics, that's when we get prohibition, and we all know how well that ended. By stoking shame around pornography, you only add to the taboo and the allure of pornography. I feel like without taboo and shame, we wouldn't actually have porn. We would just have images of people engaged in sex.
Oh, that's really well said. I like that. That's, as I deal with these issues, I think that the way we move some of that conversation forward is by acknowledging there certainly are people out there who struggle with porn use, and now it's our job to help them figure out why they're struggling. And for so many of them, that struggle is driven by the sexual messages that they learned early on, by the inability to talk about sex within the marriage or the relationship, and because they've never really thought about or dealt with what pornography is for them.
Yeah.
But I agree. The more we fight and shame people for their porn, actually, the more powerful that media becomes to them.
I also feel like the more we shame, the more rife the porn industry is for abuse and abusive practices of their performers. Because if we come from the assumption that, well, you've only gone into porn because something terrible has happened to your life, this will impact the way that we make porn. I feel like being an intelligent consumer of porn and knowing what the more reputable markets are, and just the way that we need to be more conscientious of our food sources.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the same thing with how we source pornography is important as well. But if we shame all of pornography, we can't have that more interesting and nuanced conversation where we can actually look at the more problematic aspects of porn from from the right lens. Does that make
Amen.
sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things I dealt with a lot in my recent book about, called Ethical Porn for Dicks, where I explored, if there are things that you're worried about or feeling guilty about or ashamed about with your porn use,
Mm-hmm.
then it's your job to figure out, what is it that you're ashamed of or concerned about? And if you're worried, for instance, that, it makes you feel creepy or guilty that you are masturbating and having an orgasm watching
Mm-hmm.
people that you believe were taken advantage of, then you can find ethical pornography where nobody's being taken advantage of, and you can take that shame off the table. But you can only do that if you have done the work to understand yourself, and if we support the development of an ethical, responsible pornography industry that treats people well and that is consumed well.
Yeah. I don't know how much more time we have left, but I was thinking of a client who recently talked about watching like hentai and Japanese animated porn, and I'm like, well, if you think about ethically sourced porn, these are cartoon characters. Like, people are lending their voices, but unless there are unethical ways that they're treating their animators, you can be pretty assured that
that this
people
is
are
safe.
Probably not getting exploited.
Yeah, now the fear, again, the shame and fear reaction that a lot of therapists have around, animated pornography, is then people start thinking, well, you're actually a pedophile, or you're into child sexuality in some way because you're watching these cartoons. And I think it's just this way that we get to now start to talk about the diversity of human sexuality, and ways to be ethical in all of that.
Well, when I go to a movie, or if I see an action movie or a thriller, there is a certain amount of fantasy that's there. And I imagine if you hook me up to, you hook electrodes to my head, that, certain parts of my brain will activate. Because I am getting immersed in the fantasy of being a spy, or being in this particular fight or in this world, right? It doesn't mean that I am actually going to go out and want to join the CIA and become a spy. It doesn't actually mean that I want to act these things out in real life, but having that option as a fantasy, I think, is very important.
I agree. So, Samantha, is there anything that you'd want to share with viewers? One last message around sex shame and how to overcome it.
I feel like I've been all over the place talking about sex and shame, because my brain goes in so many different directions thinking about both of these topics. I'm glad that you're doing this series. I'm glad that, or at least I hope that there is a diversity of voices talking about their experience. And if this can help others feel less alone, then awesome.
I totally agree, and that's exactly why we're doing it. Thank you so much, Samantha. This was wonderful.
Sure thing.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead.